My phone buzzed once, then again, then twice more. 4 airline charges filled the screen. 4 refundable first-class round-trip tickets to Maui. Roughly $6,000 each. $24,000 total. Then the passenger names appeared. Cody Carter. Morgan Carter. Spencer Carter. Erica Reynolds. My parents. My brother. His wife. Dad's voice from the night before came right back to me. Flights are $1,000 each. If you cannot afford it, stay behind. My thumb moved before the anger could catch up. I reported every charge as unauthorized and locked the card. A new message appeared from Mom. Thank you for finally doing something nice for this family. That message took me straight back to the family video call the night before. My name is Natalie Carter. I'm 29. And I teach at a public high school in Columbus, Ohio. Teenagers test limits every day. So I know the difference between confusion and pressure. Mom had organized the call around a family trip to Maui. She had resort photos ready. Spencer had already requested time off. Erica sat beside him looking tired before the conversation even started. Dad spoke like the trip was already settled. This is important, he said. Everybody needs to show up for once. I asked one question, before I say yes. What is this actually going to cost? Dad leaned back and laughed. Flights are $1,000 each. If you cannot afford it, stay behind. Spencer gave a short laugh. Mom smiled like Dad had just won a point. Don't embarrass yourself trying to keep up with everybody, she said. My cheeks went hot. Years earlier, that would have worked. Dad once talked me into covering Spencer's overdue car payment because I was the responsible one. Spencer promised to repay me. He never did. Back then, guilt worked. Dad had never noticed when it stopped working. Okay, I said. Then I'm staying behind. Nobody spoke for a second. Dad's face tightened. Mom jumped in. Natalie, your father is joking. I'm not going. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I'm not going. And I'm not paying for anyone else's trip. Spencer rolled his eyes. Mom lowered her voice. Do this for us. Your brother already took time off. That was his choice. The call ended with Dad saying I was selfish and Mom telling everyone we would work it out. A few minutes later, she called me privately. Your father is embarrassed. That's not mine to fix. He already told people this reunion was happening. Then he shouldn't have promised my money. Mom went quiet. 2 months earlier, she had needed an urgent flight after a family funeral. I bought the ticket through her own airline account and left my payment method saved in case she needed to change the reservation. I had forgotten the card was still there. Mum hadn't. We'll figure something out, she said. There's nothing to figure out. My answer is no. Dad had already been bragging to relatives that I was finally doing my share. He wanted the big reunion. The first-class photos. The perfect family story. My refusal embarrassed him. After our call, Mom opened her airline account and found my saved card. She called Dad. According to what he admitted later, she said, her card is still there. Dad told her. Then use it before she removes it. That was their logic. They weren't stealing. At least not in the story they told themselves. They were booking what I should have agreed to. By morning, 4 first-class tickets were sitting on my account. Dad had mocked me over a $1,000 flight. Then used my credit to buy himself a seat that cost about 6 times that. The card company shut down the account. And the airline flagged the reservations while the dispute was reviewed. Those tickets were no longer safe for them to use. Mom reacted first. She posted in the family group chat. Natalie surprised us with first-class tickets. I knew she'd come around. When the reservations were flagged, the story changed. She gave us a gift and took it back because she's angry with Spencer. Messages started landing on my phone. One aunt told me I had humiliated my parents. A cousin said Spencer had already arranged his vacation days. Another relative said Dad had been looking forward to this for months. I wrote one line. I did not authorize those purchases. Mom answered almost immediately. Please stop rewriting what happened. I stared at that sentence for a long time. She had used my card. Now she was accusing me of changing the story. Dad's messages came next. We need to talk. Then, don't make this worse. Then, you will fix this tonight. That last one changed how I handled him. When school let out, his car was waiting near the entrance. I stayed close to the main doors. Staff were still inside. I started recording before I walked over. Dad got out with his jaw already set. Your mother thought you were helping. Then why didn't either of you ask me? She knew you'd come around. Because you knew what I would say. He pointed at me. Stop twisting this. You knew I would say no. Didn't you? That hit the exact nerve I expected. Dad could handle anger. He could handle tears. What he couldn't handle was someone refusing to accept his version of reality. Of course we knew you'd say no. He snapped. That's why we booked first. I kept my face still. He kept going. Once everybody thought you paid. You wouldn't dare cancel. I told your mother to use the card before you could back out. There it was. Not confusion. Not a misunderstanding. A plan. Then his eyes dropped to my phone. His face changed. You're recording me. I slipped the phone into my coat pocket. He stepped closer. You'd really choose a credit card over your own parents. No. You chose my credit card over your daughter. I walked back inside. A second copy of the recording went somewhere Dad couldn't reach. From that point forward, I stopped arguing over the phone. I sent him one message. Anything important can be put in writing. 2 days later, my cousin Vanessa texted me. They're calling a family meeting. Then another message. They're planning to make you apologize in front of everyone. Vanessa called before I went. Your mom has been talking to everybody. She said. She's telling people you volunteered to pay. Then got jealous of Spencer. She's also saying you've been under too much stress at work. What does that have to do with anything? Her pause told me I wasn't going to like the answer. She's saying you remember conversations wrong when you're upset. It was a nasty trap. Anger would prove her point. Calmness would look detached. Even denial could be twisted against me. They're not inviting you to talk. Vanessa said. They've already decided you're wrong. I'm still going. The meeting started exactly the way she predicted. Mom looked exhausted in a way that seemed carefully arranged. Dad sat beside her with his arms folded. Spencer barely looked at me. Erica kept glancing at him. Mom spoke first. I just want our daughter back. I sat down. Dad said, You've embarrassed this entire family over a misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? You agreed to help. I looked around the room. Who here personally heard me offer to buy those tickets? Nobody answered. Dad leaned forward. This isn't a courtroom. Then one honest answer shouldn't be difficult. Mom hid. Natalie, you've been under a lot of pressure. I turned toward her. She spoke slowly now. Almost gently. Sometimes when you're upset, you remember conversations differently. I remember exactly what I said. She gave the relatives a sad look. See, this is what I mean. For a few seconds, the trap worked. Every answer I gave became more material for her story. So I stopped defending myself. I looked at Dad. Did I tell you to use my card? You're twisting the situation. Did I give you permission? You knew we were planning the trip. Did you know I would say no? His mouth tightened. You always make everything about yourself. I took out my phone. That's okay. You already answered that when you thought nobody else was listening. Dad's recorded voice filled the silence. Of course we knew you'd say no. That's why we booked first. His face drained. Then came the next line. Once everybody thought you paid, you wouldn't dare cancel. Mom turned toward him. Why would you say that? The recording kept going. I told your mother to use the card before you could back out. Mom stared at him, like the problem was the confession, not what they had done. I looked at her. Do I still have memory problems? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Spencer finally jumped in. I didn't know they were using her card. Erica turned toward him. That's not true. He snapped his head around. Stay out of this. Her expression hardened. Your dad told you Natalie was going to refuse. Spencer's face went red. Erica kept going. You said, once it's booked, she'll cave like she always does. I looked at my brother. So you knew my answer was no. He rubbed a hand across his face. I didn't actually buy anything. That wasn't my question. Silence. All three of you understood me perfectly. That was the point where the room changed. The relatives who had been staring at me turned toward Dad. One asked Mom why she claimed I had volunteered. Another asked Dad why he booked anything if he knew I had refused. Dad tried to regain control. This is private family business. You made it everybody's business when you told everybody I paid. Mom started crying harder. You're destroying this family over plane tickets. No. I'm refusing to lie about how you got them. I stood. Dad called my name. I kept walking. Vanessa followed me out. For almost 2 weeks. Everything went quiet. No angry calls. No guilt messages. No relatives demanding explanations. I slept better. That silence fooled me. I thought losing control had finally made Dad back off. Then my assistant principal asked me to come to the main office after classes. Dad and Mom were waiting there. They had checked in through the front office. And Dad had already submitted a written complaint with real messages cropped until the context disappeared. The complaint claimed I had agreed to buy the Maui tickets, then made false accusations of theft. It called the dispute a serious family financial conflict and described my recent behavior as emotionally erratic. Dad had finally found something he thought mattered more to me than the money. My job. The principal stayed calm. She looked at Dad. Mr. Carter. I need one point clarified. Did Natalie agree to purchase these tickets before they were booked? Dad answered too quickly. Yes. Absolutely. Mom nodded beside him. There it was. A clean, specific lie. I placed my phone on the table. Then I'd like you to hear what he told me before this complaint existed. Dad cut in. That conversation was private. The principal looked at him. I pressed play. Of course we knew you'd say no. That's why we booked first. Dad's shoulders stiffened. Then his recorded voice continued. Once everybody thought you paid, you wouldn't dare cancel. Mom grabbed his arm. Cody. Stop talking. We're leaving. He pulled away from her. The principal asked, Mr. Carter, which version is accurate? Dad started explaining. Then blaming. He said Mom had misunderstood him and accused me of using technicalities to punish them. The principal repeated the same question. Dad's face reddened. Finally, he slammed his palm against his thigh and snapped. If she'd just paid for the damn trip, none of this would have happened. The words hung there. Mom stared at him. The principal stopped writing. Dad's own anger had just destroyed the complaint he came to use against me. Thank you, Dad. He looked at me. For what? For making sure I never have to explain this again. The meeting ended. School staff walked my parents out. Dad had claimed I agreed. His own voice proved he knew I had refused. After that, consequences moved at the speed. Real consequences usually move slowly. The card issuer finished its review and treated the $24,000 in purchases as unauthorized. I wasn't left responsible for the charges. My old payment method disappeared from Mom's airline account, and every account I cared about was secured. The evidence was now a trail, the airline account. My clear refusal, Dad's admission, his contradictory complaint, and his school outburst. They hired a lawyer. Months later, the unauthorized use was resolved through Ohio's criminal process rather than some instant television-style arrest. Mom, who had placed the bookings, accepted responsibility for unauthorized credit card use. Dad's direction and recorded admission became part of the case against him. Both took negotiated pleas. Mom received 18 months of community control supervision and 100 hours of community service. Dad received 2 years of community control for his role in the scheme. Together, they were ordered to cover $2,100 in documented costs left after the card dispute. Dad hated one part more than any fine. The perfect family story stopped working. Relatives knew why the Maui trip collapsed. Some stopped inviting my parents to gatherings. Mom left the social committee she had spent years running. And Dad stopped posting family photos online. Spencer called me once. I didn't use the card. He said, "You knew I said no. You just expected me to surrender afterward." He had no answer for that. I blocked him. Erica made her own decision. She stopped covering for Spencer and separated from him a few months later. She sent me one short message. "I should have spoken sooner." I answered, "You spoke when it mattered." Vanessa stayed in my life. She never asked me to prove I loved her or attached a bill to loyalty. Sometimes she came over with takeout and talked about anything except my parents. And me. I kept teaching. I kept my apartment. I kept my credit. More important, I stopped flinching every time my phone lit up. Protecting the money turned out to be easier than understanding why protecting myself still made me feel guilty. That part took longer, for months. One question stayed with me. Why did saying no feel cruel when taking my money had felt reasonable to them? The answer had nothing to do with Maui. My parents had spent years teaching me a quiet rule. Love meant compliance. Gratitude meant access. Being the responsible child meant cleaning up whatever mess the less responsible people created. That system served them well and cost me plenty. The $24,000 mattered. It could wreck credit, delay a home purchase, or wipe out savings. Still, the number wasn't the deepest wound. The deepest wound was simpler. I said no. They heard me. They understood me. Then they decided my answer had no authority. A misunderstanding leaves two people with different versions of what was said. Dad admitted something else. "If we'd asked you, you would have said no." He understood perfectly. The problem was never communication. The problem was permission. He believed pressure could turn refusal into agreement. Mom believed repetition could make truth irrelevant. Spencer believed the booking itself would trap me. Once I understood that, 3 rules became impossible to ignore. The first one is this: a boundary is not a request. A request says, "Please don't do this." A boundary says, "If you do this, here is what I will do." I never told my parents they couldn't go to Maui. I never told Dad he couldn't sit in first class. I never told Spencer where he was allowed to vacation. I said one thing: I wasn't paying. Their anger exposed the part they had kept hidden. They never viewed my participation as optional. They thought my money was already available. And my job was to stop resisting long enough for them to use it. Responsible people know this pattern. You plan ahead. Keep decent credit. Save for emergencies. Remember deadlines. Praise becomes expectation. Expectation becomes entitlement. Suddenly, refusing to rescue someone feels like hurting them. That is how guilt gets confused with responsibility. Dad's insults stayed with me for a long time. If you cannot afford it, stay behind. He meant it to make me feel small. Now I hear something else. Sometimes staying behind is exactly right. If joining requires surrendering your right to choose, the expensive part is not the flight. It's you. The second rule took me longer. Stop arguing when the facts are already clear. At that family meeting, Mom created a perfect loop. I said I never agreed. She said I forgot. I said I remembered. She said my insistence proved I was stressed. There was no winning inside that argument because the argument had been built to absorb every answer. For years, I thought conflict needed a better explanation. More detail. A calmer tone. That only works when the other person wants clarity. Sometimes they already understand. They just benefit from pretending they don't. My mistake had been asking, in 100 different ways, "Will you believe me?" The better question was, what does the evidence show? That means protecting reality when someone has a habit of rewriting it. Save important messages. Keep useful receipts. Put serious disputes in writing. Use neutral people when the stakes are high. Never destroy your own credibility trying to punish somebody else. Dad's downfall came from something very ordinary. He couldn't keep his story straight. At the family meeting, his recorded voice admitted he knew I would refuse. At the school, his written complaint claimed I had agreed. Both stories could not be true. The harder he pushed, the smaller his options became. When someone's power depends on controlling the story, consistency becomes their enemy. The third rule is the one I still use most. Guilt is not a debt. Even after the charges were cleared, even after the school complaint collapsed, even after contact stopped, guilt still showed up. It sounded like Dad. We're your parents. It sounded like Mom. After everything we've done for you. It sounded like Spencer's silence. That old expectation that I would eventually fix whatever everyone else broke. Gratitude is real. People remember genuine sacrifice. None of that creates permanent ownership over another adult. Raising a child does not create an unlimited credit line when that child grows up. Love does not grant access to someone's paycheck, home, time, career, or reputation. A voluntary gift is generosity. Help extracted through humiliation and punishment is something else. Dad proved that at my school. Once he could no longer reach my credit card, he went after my job. That was the clearest answer I ever got. He wanted disobedience to hurt enough that I would stop resisting. That was the old system. I don't live in it anymore. Months after everything settled, Mom tried one final time. She sent a letter through a relative. No apology for using the card. No acknowledgement of the school complaint. Just 3 pages about how much she missed me and how families should forgive. The last paragraph said, "I'm still your mother." I folded the pages once and dropped them into the trash. No angry reply. No final speech. Nothing left to prove. That quiet mattered more than anger. Vanessa came over that evening with burgers and fries. We ate at my kitchen counter while she complained about a terrible date she had survived the week before. Halfway through the story, I started laughing. A real laugh. That ordinary night meant more than any luxury reunion. No one was keeping score. No one was waiting for me to pay. No one needed me smaller so they could feel bigger. Safe relationships started to look simple. The people who stayed wanted me there. Erica and I exchanged messages now and then. Vanessa remained the cousin I trusted. Spencer stayed blocked. My parents stayed outside the life they had tried to control. Peace never arrived with fireworks. It showed up in little places. A phone buzzing without my stomach tightening. A weekend with no emergency request. A paycheck that belonged to me before anyone else made plans for it. A quiet apartment. A locked door. A life nobody had permission to spend for me. So when I think about that sentence now, the one Dad threw at me to humiliate me, it sounds completely different. If you cannot afford it, stay behind. He was right about one thing. Some prices are too high. Silence can be too expensive. Obedience can be too expensive. Pretending a lie is true can be too expensive. Handing someone access to your peace just because you share a last name can cost more than any plane ticket. If someone in your life calls you selfish every time you finally say no, pay attention to what happens next. Do they respect the answer, or do they punish you until you change it? That difference tells you almost everything. If you've lived through something like this, share what finally made you stop explaining and start protecting yourself. Someone reading your story may need the permission you once needed. And if this story meant something to you, like the video and subscribe for the next one. The most expensive trip I never took taught me that nobody gets to charge admission to my own life. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. Why did she tolerate this for so long? Why keep explaining yourself to people who clearly do not respect the word no? There is actually a reason people stay trapped in relationships like this. And it has less to do with weakness than most people think. Think of a slot machine. You pull the lever 10 times. 9 times. You lose. Then suddenly, you win. That small win is what keeps you pulling. Toxic relationships can work the same way. Most of the time, you get guilt, criticism, pressure, or disrespect. Then every once in a while, you get affection, a compliment, a peaceful holiday, a parent saying they are proud of you. Those little crumbs of hope keep people invested. Psychologists call that intermittent reinforcement. In everyday language, I call it the slot machine effect. You keep thinking, maybe this time will be different. Now, let's talk about what Natalie eventually did right. Because there are some very practical financial lessons here. The first was what I call the audit strategy. Whenever somebody wants access to your money, slow the conversation down and ask for specifics. How much? For what? Who is paying? What exactly am I agreeing to? People who depend on pressure hate details. Details force vague emotional demands into concrete numbers. Natalie asked one simple question about the actual cost of the trip. And that question exposed the entitlement underneath the invitation. The second smart move was building the case. She stopped trying to win arguments and started preserving reality. Message. Purchase records. Her father's own words. That matters because, when someone keeps changing the story, your memory should not have to fight their confidence alone. Keep records. Save important conversations. Put major financial agreements in writing. You do not need to become a detective. You need enough documentation that somebody else cannot casually rewrite what happened. The third move is what I call the buyout. Sometimes protecting yourself costs something. Maybe it is a consultation with a lawyer. Maybe it is replacing cards, changing accounts, moving apartments, losing access to certain relatives, or walking away from money you know will come with strings attached. That can hurt. Still, there are moments when paying a smaller price today buys you freedom from a much larger price tomorrow. And here is the final verdict. Your financial boundaries are part of your self-respect. Someone being related to you does not give them ownership of your credit, savings, paycheck, or future. Generosity is something you choose. Obligation created through guilt is something very different. If you have ever had someone use love, loyalty, or family pressure to get access to your money, share your experience in the comments. Your story might help somebody recognize the pattern earlier. And subscribe if you want more breakdowns on toxic behavior, financial self-defense, and how to protect yourself without becoming the villain.